What's the biggest surprise to you as you've scaled your team?
Ooh, I guess the surprise is in at least arrogant way, Revolut's a bit of a hot ticket, right? I always meet people who are like, oh man, I'd love to work at Revolut. People want to work for what they consider the next big thing, right? So it's human nature, and especially if you're in the tech world, you want to work for that next big unicorn, the one that's going to make it. And sometimes you can arrogantly sit there and say, oh, well, we're going to get hundreds of applications inundated and the best possible people. And the hardest part of scaling is finding the right people. Every company has its own way of doing things. There's not this one size fits all approach. Some companies think some people believe the whole startup scene is bring your dog to work slides and cookies at 2:00, and every company is different in terms of how it innovates, how it moves, and it's incredibly important that you find someone who sort of has that entrepreneurial spirit. And one thing we embed at Revolut is the idea of getting shit done, which is an important thing. People who want to innovate, who want to disrupt, and like one of the beautiful things is what we consider the right people. They're just an example last week. It doesn't matter how high or low in the food chain you are at Revolut, you can have such a loud voice. And it's a beautiful thing. There's no politics, there's no fancy job titles. And we had this intern who suggested an idea, just kind of randomly went, what if we did this? Of course, top guys loved it. And that chap's now running along with it, leading it. And probably you wouldn't really get that from an intern basis in a lot of companies.
Can I ask a follow-up question though? Because there's obviously in a startup there's a lot more space for growth, but I do think you were pointing to something a moment ago where you said the dogs and the slides. There's this romantic ideal of the startup and what it should be. How do you separate kind of the romance from the reality? Because it's obviously not all roses. There are hard things about it. Like, what would you say have been the harder things?
I think in a startup, you get a lot of responsibility, and with that responsibility comes expectations. And usually in a startup environment, you're not blessed with numerous resources of budgets and additional team members. You kind of have to get shit done, right? You have to roll up your sleeves and crack on with it. So it's beautiful if you have these surroundings around you where you can go and crash on the sofa and do these things, but ultimately, your impact is going to be based on what you deliver. And startups, especially at this early stage, they don't have a lot of money to waste time. They've got to get the right people, get results, and get it done. And before Revolut, I was at Rocket Internet. We had the same approach, which is it's very data driven. It's high KPIs, but it appeals to some people. It doesn't to others. But if you're that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, hands-on person, you always want to do better. You always want to crack on to the next thing. It's the perfect environment.
Interesting. Not for everybody, Zoe.